tough guy to book because he's so busy. He's traveling abroad. He's got a ton of work to do. He's a 4-time best-selling author. His first 4 books, 1, 2, 3, 4, all are bestsellers. His latest offering is this, a book that's been out for a while, but it's in paperback, The Death of Money. You might recognize that cover. It's James Rickards. James Rickards, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be with you.
Listen, I want to kind of get into the debt ceiling that we just passed in March 15th. And you came out with a warning with the folks you are, with now, your personal warning about how this is going to be bullish for gold, that they're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. We'll have to default on our debt. Let's talk about the debt ceiling that, met everyone with a big yawn, except for people like David Stockman and yourself. What's going on with the debt ceiling? Why is that important?
Well, the debt ceiling is one of those things. It's very important, Greg, and I'll explain why. But it's got enough technicality around it that puts most people to sleep or hurts their heads. But just so you know, obviously the United States runs budget deficits year after year after year. In the last 50 years, we've only run really 3 or 4 surpluses, a couple under Nixon, a couple under Clinton. But other than that, it's all deficits as far as the eye can see. And everyone knows, I think most listeners know, we have $20 trillion of debt. Well, the Treasury can't just go out and borrow as much as they want. A lot of people think they can, but the Congress limits the Treasury's ability to borrow, and that's called the debt ceiling. And when the Treasury borrows that much money, and they want to borrow more, which they do, you have to raise the ceiling, and that requires a legislative act. It requires an act of Congress. So officially, the existing debt ceiling ran out on March 15th. The Treasury has no authority to borrow more money beyond the amount that was designated. Again, it expired March 15th. So how is the Treasury going to fund the deficit? Well, the answer is the Treasury has a little bit of wiggle room. Right now, of course, while we're recording this, this is tax season. This is when most Americans are paying their taxes. So the Treasury actually has positive cash flow. They have more money coming in than going out. So they don't need to borrow more at the moment because they have this positive cash flow. But that is strictly temporary. That's just a function of the tax season. Once we get past April, the shoe's on the other foot. We start spending more than we have coming in, and this debt ceiling is going to start to kick in. Now, the Treasury has a little wiggle room. They have cash accounts at different banks. I mean, it's not really any different than a household. People, you might have some money in a drawer. You might have some money in the bank. Maybe you can sell some stocks or money market funds to get some cash that way. You manage your domestic household cash flow. Treasury is kind of the same. So they've got a little bit of wiggle room, but not that much. They're going to hit a hard ceiling probably by August, if not sooner. And then this whole issue of does the Congress give them the authority to borrow more money is going to come to the fore. Now, the problem is you try to put you try to make strings attached. The members of Congress say, well, sure, I'll vote to raise the debt ceiling, but I want you to defund Planned Parenthood, or I want you to increase defense spending, or I want you to do one of my priorities, and then you run into problems because you gain some members, lose those. We just saw this with the healthcare fiasco. The repeal of Obamacare failed, not because of Democrats, they were never going to vote for that, but because of Republicans who couldn't agree among themselves. So you could have that. Now there's another constraint kicking in. I talked about the debt ceiling, but there's also just the ability to spend. The debt ceiling has to do with the ability to borrow, but there's also the ability to spend. That the Congress has to authorize that also. It's the budget process. Now, every year we have a budget, but believe it or not, the government works on a fiscal year. The government doesn't have a January 1st year. The government has a year that actually starts October 1st, and ends on September 30th. So you're supposed to have your new budget ready by September 30th, but the Congress never does. It really drags on into the next calendar year. So here we are in the spring of 2017, and we don't have a budget yet for the year that we're in right now. So how do you deal with that? Well, the Congress passes what they call a continuing resolution, CR for short. That's Washington lingo for a continuing resolution. And what it says is the government can keep spending what they spent the year before, but they can't spend any more and they can't spend on anything new. That gets you through part of the year, and then sometime before, kind of in the middle of the year, they pass a new budget, and that's where you get the new spending that comes along. So right now we're operating on a continuing resolution. That expires April 28th. That expires just a couple of weeks away. If you hit that and you don't extend the continuing resolution, the government can't spend. It's not even a question of can you borrow. That's one problem. You can't even spend, and the government shuts down. The last time we had these government shutdowns, I think it was 2012. You remember, Ted Cruz. This is when Obama was still president, of course, and Ted Cruz, almost single-handedly shut down the government. We're facing that now. You say, well, wait a second. The Republicans are in complete control. They've got the White House, they've got the House of Representatives, they've got the Senate, they've got the state governorships, probably on their way to controlling the Supreme Court. Can't they just do this? And the answer is maybe not, because again, a lot of it comes back to this Planned Parenthood thing. The House Freedom Caucus says we're not going to sign up for the continuing resolution unless you defund Planned Parenthood. But that will never get past the Senate because you have a filibuster and you'll never get any Democratic support for that. So we could be looking at another government shutdown. Now, this makes headlines, and obviously the military doesn't go off the job. TSA doesn't go off the job. They have ways of keeping some of these things going, but a lot of things do shut down, and the inconvenience gets greater and greater. Now, my point, and the point of my books, the point of The Death of Money, and my more recent book, The Road to Ruin, is that these are what I call snowflakes building up to create an avalanche. The avalanche is the instability of the financial system as a whole, the concentration of assets among banks, the size of too big to fail banks, the interconnectedness of the system. Almost a quadrillion, not a trillion, a quadrillion. That's $1,000 trillion notional value of derivatives. All these things are massively unstable. What does it take to cause that avalanche? What does it take to cause a loss of confidence in the system? Well, these are major body blows. I mean, you say the government has got to shut down. You say the government can't borrow. So the Congress is really playing with fire here. So we're going through some very dangerous periods. I'm not saying the system is going to collapse in the next 30 days. What I am saying is that the system is very vulnerable to collapse. It will collapse sooner than later. And these are the kinds of things that can cause it. Again, I'm not giving a specific forecast. I'm saying that we're really playing with fire here. What I would do as an investor, I'd make sure I had about 10% of my investable assets in physical gold, not paper gold, not COMEX gold futures, not London Bullion Market Association unallocated forwards, but physical gold in a safe place, not in a bank. If nothing bad happens, you're not going to get hurt with that much gold. But if some of these scenarios play out, which I expect they will, and a lot of other things are collapsing, including the stock market, that gold's your security blanket. You'll be glad you have it.
And you have been on records saying that what causes the avalanche? What snowflake? What point does it cause the avalanche? You saying that it is baked into the cake. We are definitely going to have a shutdown.
Sure.
And you've been out talking about how they are planning to shut the whole system down. Talk about that.
Well, that's exactly right. And so we look at the two most recent crises that were really systemic, meaning we came very close to collapsing the entire international monetary system. That's no exaggeration. One was 1998. That was Russia. It started in Asia in 97, spread to Russia by 98, ended up in my lap actually at a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management, which wasn't on anyone's radar screen, but that got into stress and was very close to default. It would have taken down a lot of banks with it, starting with Lehman Brothers. I mean, Lehman Brothers actually failed in 2008, but it came very close to failure in 1998, and indeed would have failed but for the bailout of Long-Term Capital Management. And I negotiated that bailout, so I had a front row seat. We had the Treasury and Federal Reserve officials in the room. It was pretty clear that the Tokyo stock market would not have opened that day. We did this in the middle of the night, got this bailout done. So that was extremely close. We were just hours away from the sequential shutdown of all the major markets in the world. 2008, same thing. We were just days away from the sequential collapse of every major bank in the world. Bear Stearns had failed in March 2008. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac failed in the summer of 2008. Lehman Brothers failed in September 2008. Morgan Stanley was just days away. Then it would have been Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera. The whole system would have collapsed. Both times there was a rescue. But look at the sequence, Greg. In 1998, Wall Street bailed out a hedge fund. In 2008, the central banks bailed out Wall Street. What's going to happen the next time, whether it's 2018, just to keep up the 10-year tempo? It could happen tomorrow, or maybe a few years down the road, 2019. I'm just using 2018 because it's that same 10-year separation. What's going to happen the next time? The central banks blew up their balance sheets to bail out the system in 2008, but they never normalized. The Federal Reserve took its balance sheet from about 800 billion over $4 trillion to bail out the system the last time. If somehow they had got back down to the $800 billion level, or even $1 trillion, let's say, I would say, hey, nice job, guys. You saved the system and you normalized your balance sheet. But that never happened. They think they saved the system. All they did was delay the day of reckoning, and they did not normalize the balance sheet. So now their capacity to do that again, to pull another rabbit out of a hat, is severely constrained. By the way, it's not just the Fed. It's all the major central banks in the world. The same math applies at the European Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, Bank of Japan, Bank of England. All of these central banks are stretched. They're not going to be able to double or triple their balance sheet the next time as they did the last time. So that begs the question, where's this rescue going to come from? It can only come from two places. One is gold, some kind of gold standard. The other one is the special drawing right, or the SDR, that's this world money. There is a third possibility, which I actually spoke to former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner about recently, which is just guarantee everything, wrap everything in a warm, fuzzy blanket of guarantees. I'm very skeptical that would work. I mean, if the crisis is caused because people are losing confidence in the system, and then you say, I guarantee the system, well, how is that going to work? I mean, people are losing confidence in you. They don't believe your guarantee. It's interesting that the elites think that will work. I doubt that it will. But be that as it may, whatever solution they come up with, it's going to take time. You're going to be in the middle of a panic, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or 9 months for the IMF to issue SDRs, or to convene a global monetary conference, or to push the legislative or executive process to get these guarantees. Whatever it is, it's going to take some time. What are you going to do in the meantime, in the middle of the panic, when central banks are constrained and you haven't come up with your new game plan? What they're going to do is lock down the system, which has happened many times before, and I talk about this in my books. Close the banks, close the money market funds, suspend redemptions, close the New York Stock Exchange. Now, they'll tell you it's temporary, the same way Richard Nixon on August 15th, 1971, when he suspended the gold standard, he used the word temporary. That video, by the way, of his announcement to the American people on that, again, Sunday night, August 15th, 1971, it's available on YouTube, but it's short. Go ahead and watch. Recommend people watch it. He said, we are temporarily suspending the conversion of dollars into gold. Of course, that was 45 years ago, and it's still in place. So that's what they mean by temporary in Washington, 45 years. But whether it's 45 years or 45 days, they're going to temporarily close all these financial institutions. Maybe you can get $300 a day from your ATM for gas and groceries. They'll say, well, why do you need more than $300 a day for gas and groceries? We'll get back to you. We're working on the solution. I call this ICE 9, and that's a tribute to one of my favorite authors, Kurt Vonnegut. He wrote a book in the early 1960s called Cat's Cradle. I highly recommend it. It's short. It's hilarious, by the way. Dark comedy, but very funny. But in Cat's Cradle, the plot revolves around a physicist who invented something he called ICE 9. It was very similar to water, except it had two characteristics that were different from H2O. One is the freezing temperature was, the melting temperature was 114 degrees Fahrenheit, which means it was frozen at room temperature. And number two, when a molecule of ICE 9 came in contact with a molecule of water, it turned the water into ICE 9. And he gave this to his children in vials. And so the plot of the book is about, if you open the vial and poured the ICE 9 into water, that stream would freeze, and then it would go into a bay, and then the ocean, and then rivers, and eventually the entire planet would freeze and life on Earth would die. It was a doomsday machine. And I use that as a metaphor for how you'll have to close down the financial system, because the first thing they'll do probably is suspend redemptions in money market funds. By the way, this was the issue in 2008. You said, where was the bleeding? What caused Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury at the time, Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve Chairman of the time, with ashen faces to walk over to the White House and walk into the to the Roosevelt room with President Bush and say, Mr. President, the system is melting down. What caused that? What they saw was that Americans were taking their money out of money market funds. Now, at the time, the law said that you could not suspend redemptions. If you called your broker and said, I want to cash in my units, wire the money to my bank account, and I'll take it out of my bank account, they had to do it. And that was, but the money market funds had to sell commercial paper to get the money to meet the redemptions. Well, the commercial paper was owned by the was the liability of the European banks. So their funding was drying up. It shows how it's all connected, and the whole system was melting down. So what they did, they guaranteed every money market fund in America. Now, since then, they've changed the law. And today, money market funds can suspend redemptions. They are allowed to do that. Most people are unaware of this. I'm sure people got a notice in the mail, probably threw it away, didn't read the fine print, but they can suspend those redemptions. And that's what they'll do. But then if you suspend redemptions to money market funds, people are going to pull their money out of the banks. Well, then they'll have to close the banks. And then they're going to sell their stocks. And they're going to have to close the stock exchange. So it's like Ice 9. It goes from molecule to molecule to molecule, freezing the system as you go along. And eventually, the entire system is frozen. So that's the metaphor, but it's actually the real world dynamic of how you lock down a financial system. We've seen it in Cyprus. We've seen it in Greece. Don't say I can't come to the United States, because this is what happened in 1914, from July to December 1914, 5 months. The New York Stock Exchange was closed. 1933, President Roosevelt closed every bank in America by executive order, just closed every bank. So the point is, these things have happened before. They've happened more than once. They've happened around the world. And they'll happen again, because it's what authorities do when everybody wants their money back at once, which is sort of the definition of a financial panic.
Yeah, and you're saying that the global elite will use this opportunity to, to take over, to cause a one world order, one world government. You can't be they can't be very happy with you coming out and saying that. You're basically disclosing their plans. Do you think this is the beginning of the one world government, one world order, as talked about in the Bible?
Sure. Well, again, I'll leave the Bible interpretation to others, but there's no question that this is what's going on. Now, here's the point, Greg. It's proceeding gradually. It's proceeding slowly. And this also is how George Soros is the leading advocate of this today, but it is the plan of the global elites. There's actually a name for it. It's called piecemeal social engineering, piecemeal social engineering. And that was the exact phrase. Piecemeal engineering was a phrase used by Karl Popper, who was a mid-20th century philosopher. He wrote a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies in 2 volumes. George Soros is the leading advocate or devotee of Karl Popper's philosophy of piecemeal social engineering. George Soros has probably 100 front groups and think tanks that he funds, NGOs and others, to pursue his agenda. But his number one NGO is called the Open Society Foundation, and that was a tribute to Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. And all it means is that if you do things very, very slowly, no one notices it. And so all the things I mentioned, global governance, global taxation, world money, they're already in process. These things are not going to, come out of the blue. The SDR, which is world money, was invented in 1969. There's nothing new about it. And has it ever been used? Absolutely. It was used. There have been many issuances totaling hundreds of billions of dollars equivalent, or hundreds of billions of SDRs over the years. The most recent issuance was August 2009. Again, a partial response to the global financial crisis of 2008. I might have been the only one outside the IMF who noticed, because I'm a little bit of a geek and I look for these things, but SDRs were issued, given out to the members in August 2009. So that's how recent they are. Global taxation, there's a project underway at the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, based in Paris. By the way, they give all these things funny names, Greg, so people don't understand them. Your kind of eyes glaze over. But this one's called BEPS, B-E-P-S. That's called base erosion and profit shifting. Base erosion is how companies get out of paying taxes by claiming deductions. Profit shifting is how companies get out of paying taxes by moving profits around the world. So Apple, one of the most profitable companies in the world, a lot of their revenue is in Ireland, which taxes at a very low rate, and they've piled up trillions of dollars of offshore earnings in Ireland. People use the Cayman Islands, et cetera. Well, the leading OECD governments, which are the same as the executive committee of the IMF, it's the G7, some of the members of the G20, the BRICS, and we know who they are. they're the losers in this because if you're a global corporation, you can put your profits anywhere you want. You can move the money around the world. But if you're one country, you're only getting to tax what you see. And if there's a two-sided transaction, you might see your half, but you can't see the other half over here. So what's happening is the major countries of the world are fighting this. They're banding together. They're going to, you know how you tag a fish, you want to trace a shark or whatever, you catch it, you tag it, and you release it, and there's a little monitor, and you follow it. They're going to give every major corporation a global tax ID number, not a US or German or French or UK tax ID, but a global tax ID. They're also going to identify these transactions. They're going to have a shared database. They'll get, Oracle or IBM or Siemens or somebody to run this database. They'll be able to track everything, and then they'll be able to attack the corporations and tax it. So world taxation is well on the way. And as far as global governance is concerned, you've got the United Nations, but you've also got the IMF and you've got the G20. I view the G20 as the board of directors, a de facto board of directors of the IMF. And this is part of what climate change is about. I don't want to dive into the climate change debate. That's a separate discussion. We don't need to get in the middle of that. But I do note that climate change is the ideal vehicle, the ideal Trojan horse for global governance, because climate really is global. I mean, whatever you think about it, it doesn't know any borders. And so if you can create a global problem, that gives you an excuse to call forth a global solution. Because if problems are purely domestic, then there's no need for a global solution. So climate change, and just to give you a concrete example, Christine Lagarde is the head of the International Monetary Fund. She's the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. I read all of her speeches and press conferences. She always talks about climate change. Now, why is the head of the IMF, which is a monetary institution, supposed to be concerned with balance of payments and foreign exchange issues and all that? Why are they talking about climate change? They're not.
Because it's a Trojan horse.
What's the Trojan horse? This is my point. The reason they're talking about it is because it's part of this global elite solution. I've actually briefed the head of the Bilderberg Group on this, my point, Greg, is that all these things are already out there. It's just that no one follows them. I talk about all of them in my books, and again, the Death of Money, the book's a few years old, but this is a new paperback edition. But usually books come out in hardback within a year. They come out in hardcover, they sell a certain amount, and then they come out in paperback, usually within a year, if they come out in paperback at all. But The Death of Money sold extremely well, I'm very happy to say. So my publisher waited 3 years for the paperback edition because they said, well, the hardcover's selling well, why not stick with that? Now the paperback edition is out. It's out new. It has brand new material in it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's the important thing. That's what makes it significant. It has a new preface where I update the information and actually talk about new information about insider trading ahead of 9/11. I talked about that in chapter 1 of The Death of Money. But interestingly, when I wrote about that, certain people read the book and they saw that I had discussed insider trading ahead of 9/11, and they actually came forward and told me new stories, new information about insider trading that I didn't know. I would have put it in the book the first time. I simply didn't. I had some sources, but I didn't have all the sources. But there were actually people, some of them came to me in tears. They wanted to unburden themselves about what they knew, and they said, well, here's a guy who's a voice, who's talking about it publicly, and so I'll tell him the story. And I've been able to include that information in the new preface to The Death of Money. So there is, it's not just a new paperback edition, but there's new information in it, and I update my discussion of financial warfare, cyber financial warfare, et cetera. So a lot of new stuff in there. But the point is, we tackle this one world, one money, one order issue head on.
And I wanted to get in back. I just want to circle back around with this, and that is, what's it look like when the system shuts down? I mean, you hint at this. This may turn into a Mad Max scenario. I mean, if you can't get access to your money, I mean, there was a study out not long ago that people didn't have $500 or $300 or whatever it was, just a few $100s for something like a set of tires that you needed right away, or some expense that was unexpected. I mean, if you shut people's banks and money and paychecks down for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, I mean, you were talking about Mad Max, aren't you?
Well, it gets to that point very quickly, and you make a very good point, Greg, which is again, who's coming up with these solutions? I'm writing about them because I see them happening, I see them coming, and I'm trying to alert people to this, kind of warn people about it. But the elites who actually, I'm not in charge of the international monetary system. I just write about it. But the people who are in charge actually believe this stuff will work. They believe that confidence is unlimited. The government is trusted. They'll tell people it's for their own good, and just bear with us. It's only temporary. They'll make all those assurances, but I'm not so sure people will go along with it. In fact, I think they probably won't. Now, in 1933, when Roosevelt closed the banks, it was in the depths of the Great Depression. He closed the banks and confiscated all the gold. People went along with it. They said, okay, we'll just wait and see what happens here. We'll hand in our gold. And so they trusted the government. That trust is long gone. That trust has been eroded because there's been too much abuse by government in the meantime. So I'm not so sure it'll work. I think they're running an old playbook, but I don't think it will work the way they expect. I actually talk on my new book. This is the new paperback of The Death of Money, but I have another book. It was just it's still out in hardback, The Road to Ruin, and I talk about what I call the money riots. There are a lot of reasons for rioting, political dissent, and so forth. But I agree with you. When you start shutting banks and shutting the stock exchange, saying, "Hey, you can't get your money, but it's only temporary. Trust us." No, people will go out. They'll start to burn down banks, and this will. But the government's ready for that also, with an emergency response, martial law. Look at your local police department. These are not. It's not Barney Fife. These are not people who get kittens out of trees for little kids. They're armored up. They've got armored vehicles. They've got automatic weapons, night vision goggles, Kevlar armor. A lot of them are taking steroids. They're bodybuilders. I mean, your local cops look like special forces. Unfortunately, they're not trained like special forces. I have a lot of confidence in Special Operations Command. I mean, Navy SEALs, those guys know what they're doing. But a lot of these local cops, I mean, they're wannabes. They've got, some of them are military veterans. They might know how to handle a weapon, but they're not really that well trained in special operations tactics. And why should they be at the local level? But they are. So they look like an arm of the military, and not to mention the National Guard, the other forces that could be deployed.
And you think things will get so bad that they're going to call out heavy-handed tactics when people are cut off and there are bread lines, and you can have, if you say $300 out, people don't have $300 for their entire net worth. I mean, you just think that things will get bad.
Well, that's right. I mean, but that's always true. I mean, governments don't go down without a fight. This idea that because I not only do the analysis, but I always ask myself, what's the reaction function? A lot of people say, well, I've studied it closely. I think this is going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, I might agree, but then what happens next? What happens after that? It's like chess. You got to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. So you can see the shutdown coming because they'll try to buy time until they come up with a solution, whether it's gold or special drawing rights or guarantee, whatever it might be. I mean, not whatever. There are really only 2 or 3 leading candidates, possibilities here, but all of them will take time, and they'll have to shut down the system. So the elites think, well, we'll just shut down the system until people will get back to them. People won't sit for that, so then they'll riot. As I say, they'll burn down banks, they'll smash windows. But then what's the reaction function to that? Well, the answer is martial law, militarized police, actual military units, and you get to something that looks like neo-fascism pretty quickly. And another point I make in my books is that all that legal authority is already in place. We're one phone call away from martial law. How many people know that the United States is operating under a state of emergency right now, today? Now, George Bush.
I did not know that.
It's true. George Bush. You can go to the WhiteHouse.gov. Go to the White House website. You can find this, and I did. It's all in my book, The Road to Ruin. George Bush declared a state of emergency after 9/11. I think it was September 16th, 2001. Just really 4 or 5 days, he declared a state of emergency, and that was not unreasonable. The country was at war, and he needed these emergency powers. But by law, that has to be renewed every year. Well, George Bush renewed it every year for 8 years, and Barack Obama renewed it every year for 8 years. It'll be very interesting. It comes up for renewal in September, by the way. It'll be very interesting to see in September 2017, does President Trump renew it? He may or may not, but at least right now, based on the September 2016 renewal by then President Obama, the U.S. is operating under a state of emergency. We're only one phone call away from martial law. So again, these sound like these deep dark conspiracy theories, and I really go to great lengths in my book to say it's not a conspiracy theory. You can look it up. It's law. It's there, and I give the citations. My books have between 100 and 200 footnotes and hundreds of pages of sources. You can go to the source. It's all documented. I never do make claims without giving you the backup, whether it's scientific, a scientific model, applied mathematics, a statutory citation, whatever it is, it's all there.
And Donald, and I just want to get into what's going on right now. We just got a hard Brexit. I mean, the paperwork's in. Theresa May put that in there. Gert Wilders didn't win the election, but he sure had an effect on it. And the ruling class in power went his way, hard right. They wouldn't admit it, but they did. Donald Trump, also populism, call it whatever you want. Maybe just people have had enough all over the world. That is something that the world powers, the global elite, as you call them, this must have caught them by total surprise. I mean, every time Donald Trump talks, blood must come out of their ears. Tell me about the Donald Trump faction and the rise of populism and the effect on the timing of this, or the effect on this, whether the timing goes on or not.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of an exaggeration, Greg. I mean, by the way, and just go back to Brexit. It was June 23rd, 2016. I have a video kind of documenting all this. The great thing about doing a lot of live TV is that you can save the clips, and so when you say that you gave an accurate forecast of something, some people make that up, but I can actually show you the video where I said it. But beginning in March 2016, I was on Bloomberg TV. I said that the UK would vote to leave, that Brexit would take place. Very few people thought that. Almost no one thought that. I was in the London Eye, the big Ferris wheel in London, in one of those capsules. 3 days before, I was in London, June 20th, 2016, saying, sterling's going to crash, gold's going to rise. That's exactly what happened. Immediately after the Brexit vote, sterling crashed 14% against the dollar. Gold went up by a comparable amount. Then in October and early November 2016, I was going around the world. I was on Australian television. I was on Bloomberg in New York. We broadcast in Europe and around the world, saying that Trump would win. And I got laughed at, but that's fine. I could see that coming. So I made these forecasts, but I was practically the only one, if not literally the only one, who could foresee a Trump victory. The Republicans, the Democrats, the media, the elites, nobody saw that coming. And they have not taken it well. Because of the shock factor, because they spent so many months, really a full year, disparaging Trump, saying how he was unfit, unqualified, and a lot of disparaging names, no need to repeat them all, that they were not able to handle this at all. Now, here's my point. It's one thing to say there's an opposition to a president. There's always some opposition to the president. It's a two-party system. But what we see now is extreme. Trump didn't get a honeymoon. He got a burning bed. There's the resistance. I just wrote a new column about this in my newsletter, Strategic Intelligence, my monthly newsletter. The most recent issue is available from Agora Financial, is my newsletter publisher. I wrote a very long piece on this. Trump is facing 4 pockets of resistance. There's the deep state, the resistance, the media, and even the Republican Party, even his own party, as we saw in the failure of Obamacare repeal. And I'm not saying they're all in it together in some deep, dark conspiracy. They don't have to be. They're coordinating. The deep state leaks to the media publishes something, the resistance picks it up, they contact themselves on social media. President Obama has set up the anti-White House. He bought a house in the Caloroma section of Washington, D.C., about 2 miles from the real White House. He set up kind of a government in exile or opposition government. He's operating through a front organization called Organizing for Action, OFA. Notice it's not Organizing for America, it's Organizing for Action. This is the continuation of the 2008-2012 Obama campaigns. He's got all that data. He owns it himself through his organizations. It was never handed over to the Democratic National Committee, and only some of it was made available for Hillary Clinton's campaign. What is it? It's a database of tens of millions of names, email addresses, phone numbers, how did you vote, voting records, demographic information, broken down by zip code, by every other category you can imagine. Then you can apply algorithms to that and data mine it. And then in addition to that, there's something called Indivisible, which is a network of community organizers. And Obama's OFA Front and Indivisible are coordinating. They actually set up boot camps for community action. They've got tens of thousands of people signing up. So when you see, let's say there's a little pro-Trump demonstration somewhere, and then you see these kind of, left-wing goon squads show up with, face masks and black hoodies and start beating people up and using pepper spray. And we've seen all this recently. There's nothing local or coincidental about it. These are planned organizations, whether it's through social media, direct action. I was in Washington recently, actually, just 2 days before the inauguration. I was trying to get out of town before the inauguration because they were shutting the place down. I was in Union Station waiting for my train back to New York, talking to a guy next to me. He kind of, started a conversation. But this guy, in the course of the conversation, his name was Dion, and it came to light that he was from Hell's Kitchen in New York. He'd come down, he'd been sent down to Washington to organize demonstrations because he was a seasoned organizer, community organizer, as the case may be. So this is a network, and it's densely connected through electronic channels and social media and these boot camps, etc. So Trump is not up against normal political opposition. He's up against the resistance and the deep state. These are agents in place inside the government, a lot of Obama holdovers. They want one of two things. They either want to impeach Trump, impeach him, remove him from office, or force him to resign, or at a minimum make him so ineffective that he's sort of a placeholder until the next election. But they're out to not oppose the Trump presidency, but to destroy the Trump presidency. This is extraordinary. I call it America's new civil war. Now, take that dysfunction, the political dysfunction, put it on top of all this financial risk that I've already described. This is a very, very unstable situation.
Yeah, Trump is not going to take this lying down. He's going to strike back. I mean, Obama does not control the Justice Department. He does not control the FBI, even though Comey to me, is compromised, or he is corrupt, or both. I don't know which. But he does not control the Pentagon. The Pentagon is behind Trump. So he's going to strike back at some point. Do you foresee a Trump strike back, a blowback against, obviously, if you know it, they must know what's going on. Is Trump going to strike back?
Well, Greg, I'm not sure. You say Trump controls the Justice Department. Well, he controls, he appointed the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and they've only recently appointed, or maybe even announced, a couple of deputy attorneys general. But a lot of those people haven't been confirmed yet. Well, that's like 3 or 4 people out of thousands of people who work for the Justice Department. United States attorneys, the different divisions of the Justice Department, the career lawyers who are in those divisions. A lot of those people are, first of all, they're Obama holdovers. The Trump administration has actually done a very poor job in the transition. They started this last May of 2016, long before the election. Both campaigns did. The Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign began their transition planning. But I don't know if Trump's heart was in it, and Chris Christie was in charge. They did a terrible job. Trump fired Chris Christie on November 11th, appointed Mike Pence. So Mike Pence is starting there with a standing start after the election. You're supposed to do this months before the election. You're supposed to have all these names lined up, or at least a significant number of them. Didn't happen. And then on top of that, you have Chuck Schumer in the Senate dragging his feet on the confirmation process, which gave more time for the Obama holdovers to do damage, leak information. So I don't think to this day, I don't think Trump has a good handle on the government, on the executive branch. Yeah, cabinet level, yes, but although even some of the cabinet appointments haven't been confirmed yet. But once you get to the deputy secretary, they have assistant secretaries, DAS, what they call deputy assistant secretaries, then the senior executive service, the career civil servants. I mean, this is layers deep, and these people, not all of them, but many of them, they're first of all left-wing ideologues. Some of their jobs are threatened. You look at Trump's budget cuts that he's proposed, talking about cutting EPA, cutting the State Department, cutting the National Endowment for Humanities, National Institutes of Health, a lot of these organizations. You don't think those people are going to push back? Their jobs are in jeopardy. So they haven't been able to really get all their people where they need them in the executive branch. There are a lot of deep state operatives, Obama holdovers, and even just, civil servants who don't like Trump. You might even be a registered Republican, but they don't like Trump because they consider him unfit, et cetera. All these people, they can take sensitive information, leak it to the press. So you got the deep state, that's what I just described. Then you have the resistance, which is what Obama has set up, and that has a lot of branches, very amorphous organization, the media, and then parts of the Republican Party, and they're all against Trump. So I'm not sure how much in control he really is.
Yeah, so you don't think he can strike back anytime soon? He can't, put somebody under indictment, or, he just needs to stay in, and the longer he stays in, the more powerful he gets, the more people he replaces. That's his game. He has to survive. He has to stay in.
Right, but he better get going. And the question is, will he be so weakened in the meantime that he never regains that power? The president's maximum power is right after the election. You're sworn in. This is why they talk about the first 100 days. It's not literally 100 days, but certainly the first year is when you're going to get most of your most important legislation through. First 2 years at the most. Obamacare was in the first 2 years of the Obama administration. Obama was president for 8 years. But the big things he did, Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, some other initiatives, they all took place in the first 2 years. Same thing with Ronald Reagan, firing the air traffic controllers, a big, tax cuts. Some of his other reforms happened in the first couple of years. That's your opportunity. Well, Trump has already squandered part of that. He's up against all the opposition I just mentioned. And he's been badly weakened. The failure of this health care bill, the repeal of Obamacare, which just happened a few days ago, the ramifications of that go way beyond health care, because it sends a signal. Let's say you're a member of Congress. Let's say you're a Republican member of Congress. You're up for election in less than 2 years. You're up for election in November 2018. It's only, about 21 months away. And you're saying to yourself, do I want to align myself with Trump? Do I want to vote for the repeal of these things? Do I want to support his budget? How's that going to play in my district? Is it going to be a primary challenger? Is it going to be a strong Democratic opponent? Maybe I need to distance myself from Trump. So you evaluate it. You say to yourself, well, is he a strong leader who's getting a lot done and gaining popularity, so I want to jump on that bandwagon? Or does he look wounded? Are things failing? Are his popularity ratings down? In which case I might want to distance myself. That's the mental calculation that these members of Congress are making. So when you see a president who gets wounded on something like a major piece of legislation, the repeal of Obamacare, the mental calculation changes. And some of these Republican members say, maybe this guy's not so strong. His popularity's down. I need to distance myself. It can feed on itself. It's a very damaging dynamic. So the White House, they've got to get in charge of the executive branch, which we talked about. They've got to put some points on the board in terms of legislative victories. And they've got to do it soon, or this guy, Trump's going to be a lame duck from the get-go.
And I want to come up with what happens with the dollar, which is going to be beyond Trump. In one of your videos, you were talking about how, if this crash happens, they're going to move to the special drawing rights currency. We'll end up with the dollar, which will turn into the peso. Can you talk about the dollar turning into the peso? Sure.
When you can see the next global financial collapse coming. That's actually the easy part. I say easy in the sense that the science of complex systems and dynamic systems analysis is very good science. It fits perfectly with capital markets. Again, the sequence 1998, 2008, whether it's 2018 or tomorrow morning, impossible to say exactly when, but you can see this collapse coming. So then, as they say, that's easy or very straightforward. What's the reaction function? How are you going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Well, there aren't that many choices. One is a gold standard. One is the SDR, the special drawing right. The elites are going to first. They're going to try with the guarantee route. The Secretary Geithner talked about, and some happy talk from the central banks. That's not going to work because they've already tried those things, and they're at the limit of confidence, the limit of what people will accept. They might roll out the SDRs. Now, the thing about the SDR is if it works, and I'm not saying it will, I'm saying it will be tried. I'm not saying it will definitely work, although it will be tried, but it might work. And if it does, it's only because nobody understands it. You and I don't get SDRs. It's not walking around money, as we say in Philadelphia. This goes to countries only. So the IMF issues it to countries, but countries can use it. They can use it to pay for oil. They can use it to settle their balance of payments. They can use it for direct foreign investment, and they can swap it into other currencies that might be more useful day to day, such as dollars, euros, yen, etc. But if you have to print trillions of SDRs to do this, that's going to be highly inflationary. I mean, there's no question about it. So we'll still have dollars. I'm not saying the dollar is going away. I'm just saying it will no longer be the benchmark global reserve currency. That will be the SDR. And we'll have dollars, but it'll be a local currency. It'll be like Mexican pesos. I mean, if I go to Mexico, I'm going to get some pesos to spend at the bar or taxi cab or whatever. And if you come to the United States, you'll get some dollars for the same thing, kind of, for local purchases, but it won't be the benchmark global reserve currency anymore. And it will be highly inflationary. That's kind of best case, if you have these SDRs, but there are many more, kind of dangerous scenarios.
And which is the reason why you came up with your best case, the new case for gold, which also do well. I love the cover. And you're saying that everybody should be having gold because everywhere you look, you're seeing inflation, you're seeing instability, you're saying gold, and if you would talk about silver a little bit too, gold and silver are the things that are going to be your rock solid, no counterparty risk investments?
Yeah, sure. Here's the thing, Greg. I recommend 10% of your investable assets in gold or silver, probably both. Silver is actually more useful in a more extreme scenario where kind of society breaks down. And I don't necessarily think it's Mad Max. It could just be it looks more like a 19th century agrarian society where we have local communities, but we don't have this globalized world. Well, one of the criticisms of gold is kind of silly, but you hear it as like, well, gold coin, 1 ounce gold coin is worth, at least today, $1,250. I expect it'll be worth the equivalent of $10,000 sooner than later. But they say, well, how can I use that for groceries? It's way too much money. I got to shave off a little bit and trade little, kind of grams of gold and so forth. Well, no, you don't. You can have silver. This is what, by the way, American money through most of American history was the silver dollar. It wasn't, some people had gold coins, but people didn't walk around mainly with gold coins. They walked around with silver dollars or paper dollars backed by gold and silver. The original silver certificate, as it was called. So silver definitely has a place, and there's no way gold's going to go up the way I'm describing, and silver won't go along with it. Silver will clearly be along for the ride. But those are major alternatives if these other alternatives, such as the SDR, et cetera, fail. But my point is people should have that now. Don't wait for the collapse, because when the collapse comes, you're going to see the price skyrocketing and you say, oh, gee, I better go get some gold and silver. You won't be able to get it. See, it won't be a question of price at that point. You'll see the price going up on TV or the internet or whatever, but you won't be able to get it. There's already it's already in scarce supply. I've been to Switzerland recently. I visited with vault operators and refiners and talked to the head of precious metals at one of the largest gold refineries in the world. He said we're having a lot of difficulty sourcing the physical gold. I just got back from China. I met with the head of precious metals trading at two of the biggest banks in China. They told me, don't believe what you hear about demand. Demand is huge. We're selling all the gold we can get. So people around the world, not Americans, by the way. Americans seem to be the last to know, but people around the world, from Shanghai to from Switzerland to Shanghai, are getting a physical gold. So when you want it in a crisis, you'll find that your local dealer is sold out, the mint is back ordered. You're just not going to be able to get it. So the time to get it is now, and that's your insurance. Only 10%. If I'm completely wrong, obviously I don't believe I am, but if I am, you're not going to get hurt with 10% gold. It'll do fine. But if I'm right and everything else collapses, you're going to be very happy you have that gold.
And and closing question: price targets for gold and silver. Where do you expect it going?
Well, for now, it's just going to kind of chug along. The Fed's right now, as we speak, in spring of 2017, the Fed is on a rate increase path. They're on a tightening path. I expect they will raise rates in June. By the way, the economy is very weak. Don't believe all the happy talk you hear. You look at workforce growth, population growth, productivity levels. These are the drivers of real economic growth. They're both doing very poorly. They're going up about 1% each. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, so you're looking at 1% real growth. Maybe a little bit better than that in the short run, but nowhere near 3.5% trend growth that we need to dig our way out from our budget deficits and our national debt and the sky-high debt to GDP ratio, so those numbers don't add up. But the Fed is tightening anyway, even in the face of weakness, because they have a different agenda, which is they want to get rates high enough so they can cut them in the next recession. I mean, it sounds absurd, but that's what happens when you keep them artificially low for 8 years. The whole zero interest rate policy, QE of Ben Bernanke, will look back at that in the future and see that as a massive failure, a failed science experiment, if you will, where we're the guinea pigs. But the Fed is now playing catch up. So they're raising rates in a weak economy and may very well cause a recession. So in the short run, that's a headwind for gold. But by the summer, I expect that the economy will stall out. The Fed will have to flip. This is the ninth flip-flop since May 2013, from tightening to ease. And then that's going to be a tailwind for gold. And I expect gold to be, much higher, exact price, certainly well over $1,300 an ounce and getting stronger before the end of the year. Now, having said that, my intermediate, meaning, kind of 2 to 5 year price target for gold is over $5,000 an ounce and ultimately $10,000 an ounce for the reasons I've discussed, which is if you have to go to gold to restore confidence in a new financial crisis, you have to get the price right. People say, well, there's not enough gold to support the money supply. Well, that's silly. There's always enough gold. That's easy. The question is, what's the right price? At the current price of about $1,250, $1,250 an ounce, that's very deflationary. You cannot support the money supply with the existing amount of gold at that price. But you don't have to pull gold out of thin air. You just raise the price. And then the implied non-deflationary price is, my estimate is $10,000 on some conservative assumptions. You can get to $40,000 if you want to assume 100% backing. I only assume 40% backing. But even if it's half my conservative estimate, $5,000 an ounce, that would be like the lowest price I can see for gold that would have any viability or restore confidence at all. And that's still 4 times where it is today. So, people say, gee, I'm nervous about having gold in my portfolio. I would be nervous if I didn't have gold in my portfolio. I don't know how people can sleep at night without at least a 10% allocation to gold.
And for silver, just real quick, where do you ultimately see it going? $300 an ounce, $400 an ounce?
Well, look, it's going to tag along with gold. So if gold goes to 5,000, then silver goes to 100, and if gold goes to 10,000, silver goes to 200. So gold's not going to go where I expect. Candidly, I spent a lot more time analyzing gold because it is still to this day the linchpin of the international monetary system. It's just that no one wants to talk about it. I mean, the IMF disparages gold. Well, that's fine. Why do you have 3,000 tons IMF? I mean, why does the IMF cling to 3,000 tons of gold? Why does the U.S. keep 8,000 tons of gold? Why does Europe have 10,000 tons of gold if it has no value? Well, the answer is it does have value. It is the backstop of the monetary system. It's just no one wants to talk about it. So I spent a lot more time analyzing gold. But look, gold's not going to go to those levels and silver stay where it is. That's not going to happen. Silver's going to be along for the ride. So sure, $100 to $200 silver is definitely in the cards in these scenarios that I'm describing.
Jim Rickards, thanks for coming on for the in-depth interview. This is The Death of Money, an old book, all updated. So basically, it's a new book, The Death of Money, 4-time best-selling book author James G. Rickards. Jim Rickards, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Loved it.
Thanks, Greg.